Joining us now is Senator Gary Peters, one of the two U.S. senators representing the state of Michigan. Senator Peters, thank you for being with us today.
With you.
Glad to have you back once again. I wish we were starting our conversation on in better times and under better circumstances. Of course, had the horrific shootings here in Oakland County, where we originated our broadcast, at Oxford High School on Tuesday, and many of our representatives at the state level in Lansing and at the federal level in Washington, D.C., both our representatives and yourself, had made several statements over the last couple days in session regarding the shooting. In terms of action, I think that's what the community of Oxford and what our greater community here in Oakland County and across the state of Michigan is really curious about at this point in time. Being that happened so recently and that it affects us here in the state of Michigan, what have you and the rest of the delegation on both sides of the aisle from the state of Michigan, what discussions have been had, if any, so far about changes in policy or at least discussions that could be opened on gun violence, on mental health issues, and other related issues that ultimately impact the school shooting issue here in the U.S.?
Well, certainly we just witnessed another horrific, tragic event in Oxford. Our hearts go out to all of the families. I can't imagine the pain that they're in right now, and we certainly do need to take action. We have to have serious discussions about how we limit gun violence, not just in schools, but throughout our society. This is something that I continue to talk about, continue to press, and I think it's very important. If you're looking at gun safety issues, for example, and this is not just about the horrific events at Oxford, but yesterday, roughly 100 people died of gun violence yesterday. Today, roughly 100 people will die of gun violence again today and tomorrow. We have to deal with the issue. We have to put common sense gun laws in place for safety, and that means background checks, making sure we're closing loopholes, doing everything we can to keep weapons out of the hands of folks who simply should not have those weapons in their hands. And this is an issue that is hitting us every single day, which is why it is so frustrating that we're not able to move that type of legislation forward. I fully support it. We got to get it on the floor and have those kinds of votes. But as you mentioned, there are also issues related to mental health issues, counseling, to be able to make sure that we're intervening in individuals who may be showing warning signs that they may engage in violent behavior. I think the important thing for us to remember is there's no one simple answer here. This is an incredibly complex situation, but it requires a serious, thoughtful discussion, and we need to take meaningful action, not just for what happened in Oxford, as horrible as that is, but understand we're going to see more of these events in the future if we don't take action. And there are a number of common sense things that we must do, and I fully support, and we're going to keep pushing for them.
We're joined by U.S. Senator Gary Peters on the MegaCast. Senator Peters, also on another note, President Biden recently signed a number of different bipartisan infrastructure laws that include $500 million in funding for the STORM Act, the Safeguarding Tomorrow Through Ongoing Risk Mitigation that you authored. Can you tell us a little bit about the STORM Act and how it will benefit local communities here in Michigan?
Well, I'm pleased that legislation that I wrote and passed in the Senate earlier this year was included in this bipartisan infrastructure package in terms of funding. The STORM Act is related to what we're seeing happen on an ongoing basis, which are increased storms and the severity of those storms as a result of climate change. Certainly in Michigan, we've seen major storm events and major flooding throughout the state that is a result of storms that continue to hit us. You know, when you start seeing 100-year storms happening every few years and 500-year storms happening, we know that we need to be better prepared. And the way to prepare for that is to make sure that our infrastructure is designed to handle the severity of the storms that we are seeing. So the STORM Act is straightforward. It is a revolving fund that provides resources to local communities to invest in strengthening their infrastructure to prevent things like flooding. These are great investments from a taxpayer perspective, in the fact that we know every dollar we invest up front in making our infrastructure more resilient, you end up saving $6 to the taxpayers. It's a whole lot cheaper to build the infrastructure strong at the front end than try to pick up all of the pieces after a storm and have a major disaster on your hands. So that was passed earlier this year, and in this infrastructure package, a first tranche of $500 million was allocated to that program. That money will be available for local communities across the state of Michigan to be able to tap into. And then as they pay those funds back, it's a revolving fund, so that means that money will be available for other communities. So we're hoping that this initial investment will be just that, an initial investment. We'll continue to see more investment in this into the STORM fund, and as a result, save hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money while doing the right thing by investing up front.
Senator Peters, we've also heard a lot of debate about the Build Back Better Act, which has also it's passed the House and it's now being debated in the Senate. What are some ways that this bill will cut costs for workers and for families here in the state of Michigan?
Well, I'm glad you put it that way, because it's exactly what it does. It's about reducing costs for families and dealing with some of the real tough issues that families have to deal with every day. You know, one aspect that is particularly important, not only just to reduce cost to a family, but also help the demands of workforce and the need for a workforce. We are seeing worker shortages right now. And one major problem that families face is the lack of affordable daycare, particularly for women. We see more women leaving the workforce and not returning to the workforce because of challenges that their families face with having affordable quality daycare. That is part of the Build Back Better program, is to make sure that that's available and to help families afford that by reducing their costs, so that they know when they put their child in quality daycare, they can feel comfortable with that. It's safe and a quality experience. And they can also be in the labor force. And related to that is to make universal pre-kindergarten, so that students can get into an educational setting prior to kindergarten. We know, one, that's really great for taxpayers again. For those programs have huge returns on investment, that people who are in pre-K tend to be much more successful later in life. But it also helps families reduce cost and be able to afford having that kind of quality services available for their children. But there are also other aspects for senior citizens to reduce the cost of drugs. Folks who are also taking insulin with diabetic medicines. Insulin now will be capped, so it's affordable for folks. This legislation is about reducing cost. It's also about making sure that we have a 21st century workforce that can work and continue to grow our economy and create even better paying jobs in the future.
We're joined by U.S. Senator Gary Peters on the MegaCast. And Senator Peters, earlier this week in Taylor, you hosted a roundtable with the U.S. Secretary of Commerce about the ongoing semiconductor shortage and the ways that that's affecting our auto industry. What came out of that roundtable discussion, and particularly for Michigan, being that our industries here are so automotive-centric on a large scale? How close are we to getting the automotive industry back on track for normal operations, given some of the shortages supply-wise that are affecting them?
Well, we do have significant supply shortages, and this is a significant problem, not just in the short run, but also in the long run. And bottom line, the reason for this is that we are overly dependent on foreign sources for critical materials. It's something that I illuminated back in 2019 with drug shortages, that we were overly dependent on China and other Asian countries for medical supplies. And in 2019, that report that I authored, the conclusion was when there is a pandemic, the United States will find itself in a precarious situation. Unfortunately, just a few months after that report, we learned, unfortunately, that that is indeed the case. But it extends not just to medical supplies, but other critical supplies, and right now, semiconductors, which are in every one of our automobiles. As we speak, there are cars just sitting in the lot at our manufacturers that are built, with the exception of chips, which need to be inserted. And as a result of that, we've seen production slowdowns and people being laid off. We need to get more transparency there, and that's what the Secretary talked talked about so we can get a better sense in the short run. But what she was really there for was to push for the passage of legislation that I worked to get included into the Senate package for competitiveness, which is to make sure that we can onshore manufacturing, bring those jobs back to the United States to manufacture semiconductors here in the United States, both advanced semiconductors as well as the so-called legacy chips, which are in our automobiles. But they're not just in our automobiles, so they're also in washing machines and nearly every product that we use. We need to make sure that we're making those here in the United States. We have inserted $52 billion to bring that manufacturing back to the United States. Secretary Raimondo was making the case as to how important it is that that legislation passes. It's passed the Senate. The language that I was able to get into the bill for legacy chips is out of the Senate and is now before the House of Representatives. And we're hoping we can find agreement with our House colleagues and get it passed quickly.
I'm joined by U.S. Senator Gary Peters today on the MegaCast. Senator Peters, I know that we need to let you go here very soon. So before we do, I want to give you an opportunity to let us know anything else that we should be keeping in mind or any other news from your office in Washington, D.C., representing us here in Michigan, or anything else you'd like to say before we let you go.
Well, just briefly, the other issue that I'm focused on now is cybersecurity and to make sure that we are protecting our cyber networks from attacks, particularly ransomware attacks that I know listeners have been hearing about. We've had some very high profile attacks, most recently on a major pipeline, the Colonial Pipeline, which shut down operations as a result of an attack from an organization, a criminal organization. I've authored and passed through committee significant legislation for us to deal with this issue, to protect our communities, our critical infrastructure, but our small businesses. One particularly striking statistic is that over half of small businesses that get hit with a ransomware attack are out of business within 18 months. It is an existential threat that our small businesses face, as well as families, and I'm working to make sure we're addressing that through my work as chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee.
Well, Senator Peters, we thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.